How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 301 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode, I'm going to be covering a listener's question, but before we get on to that, it's been a serious week of rain here, certainly here, and I think across the whole of Ireland, and strangely high temperatures in the last day or two. Went out for a walk early this morning, and like we're into early November, and I had a t-shirt and a hoodie on, and this like it was really hot. And just checking the temperature in the car earlier on, 17 degrees. Just felt kind of balmy, which is it's really strange for this time of the year, and just so much rain falling with it. So it's definitely a strange time weather-wise. It's it's a good time, I suppose, for the grow along because all of those seeds are getting nice temperatures. There's been no real cold yet, and they're growing quite well. So that's good. And I know I need to do a kind of an update on that very, very soon. I know certainly some of the stuff in my polytunnel needs to be potted on. Some of it needs to be moved to the next stage. So I definitely need to cover that very, very soon. Hopefully the rest of you guys are getting on well with your grow along. But as I say, weather-wise, it's been quite good. Generally speaking, still loads of harvest. I'm still getting lots of tomatoes. I don't know if anyone else is, but lots of tomatoes from the polytunnel, and yeah, lots of harvest still. So it's kind of going really, really, really good, except for the last week, which has just been so wet. Um, it's probably going to slow up bare root season a little bit, that high temperatures, because we've had no frost, and obviously there's a little bit of frost needed to kick plants into dormancy. But nonetheless, it's an interesting November so far and end of October. So yeah. But this week it's a listener's question, and it's a really good one. It's an interesting one, and it's something that comes up quite regularly, but I think it's kind of important to delve into it. And it is something, as I say, a situation that develops in public spaces and also in people's gardens. And I can certainly, when we get into the question, I can certainly see some similarities between what this listener is having and discussions this listener is having and some that I'm having myself. So I'm going to read out the question and then get into kind of the answer. And it's an email, quite a long email. So just go through it. I've listened to the podcast for almost a year now and learning lots of good info to improve my gardening knowledge. The podcast is really good. You're doing a nice job of bringing accessible gardening information in nice bite-sized chunks at relevant times throughout the year with good variety of guests and topics. Episode 300 will be a big achievement in the coming weeks. Yeah, that was actually last week, yeah, and I hope you get a chance to celebrate it. So, yeah, I'm not so good at celebrating those things. I probably should because when you think about it, episode 300 it's quite a milestone. Each of the episodes is, they're relatively long. They're typically kind of packed with information, actionable stuff that you can do at home. So yeah, I guess I should be celebrating it, but so far I haven't, but hopefully. So I know you're happy to receive questions, so hopefully you're okay with me sending you this one. Definitely, yeah, keep any questions that you have. They're always great. They're always great platforms for an episode, a question or a discussion point. And as I said before, whenever somebody is, asking questions or having a discussion point like this, there's always somebody else that's in the same boat. So answering it does help other people. So I think it's great. Keep those questions coming. So over the past year, I've been trying to build a garden to support biodiversity at our new house in County Galway. In brackets, it just says north of the county and well inland from the coast. Although my wife has serious doubts about it because it looks messy. I'm new to this and learning bits as I go. So I can relate to that bit and I'll explain why, where my wife thinks certain aspects of what I do here are messy as well. But I can understand that conversation and I've had that conversation. So yes, I can understand what's happening. Here's a brief feel for the progress so far. Last winter, I planted a mix of around 15 native tree whips and a short stretch of white thorn hedge. I have the dig partially done for a wildlife pond, and then in brackets, hopefully to be able to swim in it. But it'll be next year before I get back to that. I've let the grass grow to a meadow in an area approximately 50 by 20. It's a big area. Last summer and this summer, and cutting and removing it in the autumn time. But as it was a newly planted lawn initially, the wildflowers haven't really started to establish yet. I think it'll take a few more years. I think it'll take a few more. I think I have a few more this year than last year, as in there's a few more wildflowers in it. Sorry. Last winter, I aggressively scarified a couple of patches and sowed a wildflower mix with yellow rattle from Sandro. I learned about Sandro from your podcast, and the yellow rattle came up in a reasonable amount, so hopefully next summer it'll be better. I want to bring in some early season colour and want to pick the best options for nature that I can. I have some bluebells ready to go in, and I'm happy with them as they are native. I've considered a few other obvious spring choices like snowdrops, daffodils, crocus, allium, and because they're not native, I'm wondering if there's better options to pick. Could you give any suggestions for early spring colour flowers that are native and add to biodiversity? I appreciate any pointers on this. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Pori. That's yeah, very thanks for the message firstly. And the question, as I say, the question is one that I can definitely relate to. So I mentioned previously that I have a wildflower meadow at the front. It's a native Irish wildflower meadow. It was a lawn area. I started with removing the grass and then sowing into that in May. It'll be 3 years now, so 4 years next May. And I've mentioned this before, any of the episodes talking about wildflowers, any of the courses that I've done talking about wildflowers, the picture of a wildflower meadow is, that's the thing that people visualize. And it's really important to be aware that picturesque meadow look, it really only looks like that for about maximum 3 months in the year. So say for example, my meadow, I have, and I'll come to the bulbs in a minute, they're important in this conversation as well. But just in terms of that full picture, full color wildflower meadow, the the meadow will look brilliant from about middle of April through to the middle of July, thereabouts. And at that point, like, there will be flower, there'll definitely be flower, but there'll be a hell of a lot of seed heads that are gone over. And if you're to look at that meadow in, as I say, middle of April through to the end of June, middle of July, it will look fantastic. And it will change during that period. So, for example, my meadow is heavily dominated by ragged robin in one of those months, and it has that massive pink, and it just looks absolutely class. The oxeye daisy has its month in the sun, then after that. And then there's other months where you have, a variety of things. There's always going to be flower there and I'm talking about my meadow here, from probably March time through to essentially end of September, middle of October. But in many people's eyes, that meadow looks untidy for definitely when you're leaving the seed heads there. So certainly from the middle of July right through, I've 3/4 of mine cut now. It should have been done 6 weeks ago. It's not. I'll finalize finishing it tomorrow. That's the plan. Um, but when you're waiting to cut that, it does look, to the eye, it looks untidy. So I can understand your wife saying that it looks messy, because in the typical what we expect, it does and will look messy. And there's several elements here. Now, this is not the question. I'm going to get to your question about early color in a minute. But I think it's really important, firstly, that you're doing a really good thing here where you're looking to support biodiversity in the garden. And you are looking at native, and you are, doing a lot of the right things. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So what you can do is, and I'll come specifically to your meadow in a minute, but there is more than one way to support. In fact, there's several ways to support, and I would direct you to the All Ireland Pollinator Plan website. And I think that has even, the plan has evolved and changed over the years. And the plan now mentions and points people towards, I think, a lot more choice in trees, shrubs, and wildflowers than it previously did. And there is no doubt that native plants are probably going to be the most suitable or the most supportive of the native insects that we have here. There's no question about that. That's the reality. But that doesn't mean that the other plants, non-native plants, are not going to have some support. So while certain times of the year you mightn't have native plants that, look really good from the perspective of the aesthetic of a garden. So there is absolutely no harm in mixing them with, natives with non-natives, bulbs with wildflowers, and creating a sort of a garden that's in harmony, that has something to offer all year round, offer to the pollinators all year round. And that can be flower for food. It can be, for example, proper bug hotels, um, areas like areas that can be used as havens for biodiversity, like your wildlife pond that's coming up. And in doing this, by marrying the native and non-native plants, it's important to, I suppose, have an overall goal. And don't be afraid to mix plants to create areas that have huge beauty by using your perennial plants, your standard perennial plants, and blending through them some really good native plants that will support biodiversity. And then you're starting to get the best of both worlds. You're getting that beauty that's going to make areas look really well and less messy, but you're also at the same time supporting biodiversity. And I think that's, like if you look at some of the really best examples of borders, you know, there's loads of them around the country, but really good perennial borders, they will have some native plant in there. They'll certainly have shrubs, flowering shrubs. They will almost certainly have flowering trees. And all of those are adding a layer. So you're trying to layer these little supports for the insects and the pollinators and biodiversity. And don't just think in terms of, bees or pollinators. Think about the wider ecosystem in your garden. And I think by doing that and by discussing that and being clear about what the vision is overall for the garden, that this is a garden that I want and we want to support biodiversity. We want it to look beautiful for ourselves, but we also want to support biodiversity at the same time. And that's very, very much achievable. So that's a kind of an overview. Specific to this area, so 50 by 20. And as I've said before, this was an area that was initially set as a lawn. And I mentioned on the podcast before, when you're looking to establish a wildflower meadow, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, which is, there's a brilliant website there with so many resources. And I definitely, Pádraig, I would go look at that website just to give you some, it'll give you plant lists, actual plant lists that you can just go and say, right, oh yeah, I see what they're talking about here. And you have all those lists for shade, lists for wet areas, trees, perennials, everything, bulbs, the whole shebang. So that's a great place to go and visit, and you can start to formulate your ideas there. But when you're creating a wildflower meadow that has been just in lawn, and the All Ireland Pollinator Plan says don't mow, let it grow. And as I've said before, I totally agree with that concept if it's an area that hasn't been kept as a lawn previously. If it has been kept as a lawn previously, you do not have the seed bank there of wildflowers. They're just not there. Whereas if you're in an area that, might not have been kept or maintained as a lawn, generally speaking, down low, there will be these, plantains, achilles, all of these that are just not coming to the fore because they've been mowed tightly over time. But if it hasn't been, treated with anything to take out any weeds and so on, then they're going to be there. And as soon as you stop mowing and let it grow, the plantains, the clovers, the achilles, they're all going to come to the floor. But in this scenario, they're not there. The seed bank is not there. So you've done the right thing in terms of putting in your yellow rattle, and that will reduce the vigor of the grasses. But at the same time, there isn't going to be a seed bank there for you to for wildflowers to really start coming through. That's going to take a good while. So again, you're doing the right thing by adding that. But I can understand from your wife's perspective why she's looking out here, and basically what she's looking at is a meadow, but it's not a wildflower meadow. It's like an agricultural meadow because that's what it is. It's grass predominantly. Now, this year, your email says that a few more flowers have come in, and that will continue. As you remove the grass, you'll reduce the nutrient levels in that soil, and over time, certain seeds will start to seed into it, and they will improve. But it's going to be a slow process. But what I would say is that document or highlight that that's what this is. You're trying to build something here. If it was in a public space, I would always recommend that people put up a sign and say, listen, this area is being enhanced for biodiversity. So just verbalize that. Um, this is not still haven't answered your question, but I want to kind of set the tone. And it is, I can understand, as I say, my wife looked out and says this is messy looking, but what you're looking to do is show the benefit that is there. So cut paths through it. Like 50 by 20 is a big area, and I don't know the shape of it, but I would cut paths through it if if you can. Cut out a seating area in it so that you can both sit out there, immerse yourselves in it. When eventually these flowers start to come, you can sit in the biodiversity area, you can feel and see all this insect life. And like from our perspective here, my youngest girl, Emmy, she absolutely is insect crazy. So in the months when that wildflower meadow is flowering and flowering well, she will be out there walking around in her bare feet. We have pathways cut through it. There's a kind of a seating area in the middle of it, and she will be out there looking at bees, looking at bugs, picking up things, gathering flowers, and that's what it's about. So you're creating that connection. So if you're able to create pathways through it, I don't know if any of you do yoga, but cut out a zone in the middle of it, practice your yoga out there on a good day, and now you're starting to become connected to the space. Okay. And I think that's really important in terms of, I suppose, selling what you're trying to do. So it's brilliant what you're trying to achieve, but if everyone is not on that journey, or are not able to see the fruits of that journey yet, then it's important to sort of show, why this is important, and show that it is working, but also start to add things. And this is where we're going to get on to your question. Start to add things that will beautify this space while still supporting biodiversity. Now, that's a long ramble to a certain extent, but the purpose of it is to, I suppose, show people, what it is you're trying to do, and then try and build their connection to it and your connection to it. And then it becomes much easier over time to develop out this further. But it doesn't have to be just, a meadow. So what I'm going to come on to here is that 50 by 20 space. Cut your pathways through it, cut out your yoga area or your seating area in it, right? That's step one. You're already taking away the grass, so that's going to be reducing the nutrient levels. You already have your yellow rattle in there. That's going to continue hopefully to, weaken the grass as well. Some wildflower seeds are going to seed in there over time, but it is going to take a little bit of time. So let's help it out a little bit. To go back to your original question, the bulbs that you mentioned, by all means, get those in there. Don't worry that they're not native. So put in your daffodils, put in your crocuses. You already have your native bluebells. They're going to be brilliant support to biodiversity in the early months. I would definitely be adding in some muscaris. If you have an area that's near there, that's shaded, I would put in some wood anemones. A brilliant one, which is going into my own meadow, or hopefully over the next month, is camassias. And the reason camassias are so good in a meadow is that, well, two reasons. Number one, they're really well able to compete with grasses. So at this point in time, you have a lot of grasses. So they're really well able to compete with grasses. They're quite tall, so they will stand up above any kind of grass canopy that is there, even if it's a short one, and they'll flower above it. But more importantly, they look really beautiful at a time of the year where not much else looks good. So if you're able to get a lot of camassias, now you can build it up over time. You don't have to do it all in one go. But if you can put some camassias in, if you are, starting this year with some camassias, put them to the front, put them to the side that's most visible, so that, in a couple of months' time, when they're starting to flower, that's the first thing that, you see and your wife sees as you look out. So you're starting to add this instant color through that meadow. Your bluebells are already going to be there. Definitely, when they start flowering, they will support biodiversity. And get out there and have a look, and you will find that there'll be bees on those. That's certain at that time of the year. So don't be afraid of in terms of the native and non-native at that stage. Use any of those bulbs. And again, to reference the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, they mention all of those on their website, and support the use of all of those. And they're going to beautify the area. They're going to make it interesting. They will add. There will be a food source for early pollinators coming out, and they're going to spread and naturalize in that wildflower area, and they're going to look brilliant at a time of the year where there isn't anything else looking good in that area. So by all means, lash all those in. The other thing to think about within that area is to add possibly some trees into it. So if you think about it again, that area is relatively big, 100 square meters, and all the flowers down low, so the interest is all down low. But there would be nothing to stop you getting some really beautiful trees, and these can be native. They don't have to be. They don't have to be. They can be native trees. Like, for example, you get some really nice crab apples, but there's also some cultivated, really special crab apple trees. I've mentioned them on a previous podcast. In my meadow, I have Malus Evereste, which is a beautiful tree. It's quite young now, so I'm not seeing the full benefit of it yet, but that's a fabulous tree. And again, if that's planted, towards the front or towards the area that's easily viewed, then come springtime, this beautiful flowering tree will be looking back towards the house. So that's the first thing that's catching your eye. It's not the messy meadow as such. And if you were able to plant some of those, crabapple tree, a willow tree, brilliant. Willow trees are brilliant for pollinators. Those little furry catkins that you get in the springtime, they're brilliant for pollinators. So again, you're supporting biodiversity, but it's not, in your flowering sense. It's in a different way. And so a willow tree would look brilliant there and would support biodiversity in a different way. The likes of the sorbus Joseph rock, so a mountain ash tree, again, a native tree, brilliant for autumn color. You have your berries in the autumn time, so that's going to be feed for the birds. So there's so much, trees can add so much there at this time, and they're going to add a different dimension to it. You're not looking at this short meadow just with grass that looks untidy. You're adding a dimension to it, another height, another size, but also supporting biodiversity and beautifying at the same time. So that's worth considering. Another thing worth considering to go into that meadow is the native primula, so Primula vulgaris, brilliant early season flower as well. It's not so much of a pollinator support. Like you will see some pollinators, some insects on it, but it's more a beautiful plant to add to your meadow in this first spring color. And at that time of the year, there'll be very little else flowering, and they'll continue to flower. They'll multiply really, really well across the meadow. So after a period of a couple of years, you will start to see hundreds of them across the meadow, and they'll flower. And now you're getting different periods of flower looking beautiful, um, increasing I suppose, the aesthetic of the area, but also still sticking to, your main goal, which is supporting biodiversity within the garden. So there's some good options. So all of your typical bulbs, Primula vulgaris, add in a couple of trees that really have, a beautiful look, like, as I say, crab, apple, sorbus, Joseph rock, any of those type trees. And now you're adding multi-dimensional things to it. Then you mentioned about the wildlife pond that potentially you'd be able to swim into, and that would be fabulous. If you're going down that route, um, definitely have a look at, a couple of weeks ago we had Ashley Dowling on, the pond girl Ashley, and check out her episode. Check her out on Instagram. Send her a message. Ask her for advice on plants and native. She's very big on supporting biodiversity within a wildlife pond, and by all means, incorporating a swimming element into that would be brilliant. Again, have a look at what will look well in that area. So allow it to be beautiful, which it can be, but also to support biodiversity. So there is there is always this, if you're really into supporting biodiversity, there is this thing where people just let the gardens go wild. And that will look messy and it will look untidy in you know, there's no point in saying any difference. That's what it will look like. But there is ways of adding so much support to biodiversity while also having beautiful gardens. And I think that's the aim, and that's what you should be trying to do here. So when that section gets added, beautify that pond, put the right plants into it. Um, as I said, check out experts like Pond Girl Ashley, and she'll direct you point you in the right direction in terms of planting and all that sort of thing. Then out from that, there's nothing to stop you putting in really good perennial borders that will look beautiful. So they're going to satisfy that aesthetic part where we want this garden to look nice, and we want it to look presentable, and we want it to look beautiful and all those things. But also on the flip side of that, we want it to support biodiversity. And those two things don't have to be on opposite sides. They can be completely merged together and joined together, and they can work really well together. So start to maybe look at that as an option as well, to create beautiful perennial borders, especially in the viewing line of where you're looking out of your house or where you're sitting maybe, and adding a lot of color into that will that will support biodiversity and so on. Um, Other plants that can be added in, or even if it comes to the this wildflower area, if it's taken a little bit too long to establish, why not just remove the sod in a certain part of it and actually plant in something like a catmint? If you had say a seating area or a yoga area in the middle of it, take out a sod, plant in some catmint in there, let that establish, let that be really beautiful, and also supporting biodiversity, but have it included into the meadows. So, you know, add things together, mix the wild or native plants with the non-natives, and beautify areas while also supporting biodiversity. I know I've kind of gone around the topic a lot, but when it comes to your specific question around early season color, I would be looking at all of the bulbs that you mentioned, and don't be afraid that they're not native. They will be perfectly good. Muscari's really good. add in those. Wood anemones, if you can, add in those. Camassias, definitely from the point of view of the aesthetic, they're going to be superb. They compete really well in a grass area, and they're brilliant at, I suppose, adding a little bit of height, little bit of color at a height within the meadow. So camassias definitely add as well. The other thing that possibly in the garden already, so it's not specific to Pori's garden, but herbs are so good for for biodiversity, for pollinators and so on. But they're also multifunctioning in that they're superb, for medicinal purposes, for culinary purposes, and so on. So if you can create even a herb border, all the usual herbs, lemon balm, sage, mint, thyme, borage, rosemary, oregano, they're superb for biodiversity. They're very good for culinary use. They're very good for medicinal use. So multifunctional, look relatively well, and will support biodiversity. So again, just another layer to add in. You can add in some really interesting sort of pieces within the garden then, like wildflower, wild bird feeders, um, nesting boxes, bug hotels, things like that that look good, create a little bit of an interest, are genuinely supporting biodiversity, but also have, as I say, architecturally, they look good. And, all of that is supporting a wider system. And I think that's important, you know, especially if you're trying to get people to come on the journey with you, you need to show them, the wins, you need to show them what's working, what's not, explain why we're doing this, why we're doing that. But also, you do need to, from your own point of view, even add some beauty into it, because the best gardens that I've seen for biodiversity have so many levels to it. It isn't just the wildflower level meadow. It'll have bird feeders. It'll have, you know, areas where different bees might nest. There could be a sand mound. There could be a dead hedge. Anything like that that's adding another dimension. Cut paths through your meadows. Put in a yoga area. And all of those things are just creating little bits of interest. So you can have a garden that is multi-dimensional. It has a little bit of the untidy, the little bit of the unkept, a little bit of a wild area, even some nettles and things in it, and that will be supporting biodiversity. And then side by side with it, you have these flowering trees. Side by side with that, you have your perennial borders, and everything is adding layer after layer of support and habitat for biodiversity. And now what you're creating is, you're not creating a wildflower meadow in its singular form. You're creating an ecosystem which is your own garden. And I think that's the kind of aim. Some of that information is not specifically aimed at Parry, because I don't know the full situation, but um, you always see that when you're trying to bring other people on the journey with you. If you see it in public spaces, if an area is left and is not mowed, you get the initial clamor of, oh, that looks so untidy. But if you put up some signage saying what's happening here and give that a little bit of time, then people come on that journey with you. If you're able to show, a poster, and again, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan supports a little bit, with bits of this. But if you were to put up a poster showing that this is the 20 insects that we can find in this wildflower meadow, and that creates a bit of a story, a bit of a talking point, and it's easier to sell that, you know, what some people might call an untidy look, when the picture and the story is clear to everybody. So, yeah, as I said, some of that doesn't apply to Par, or may not apply to Parry's garden. I know it certainly has applied here, where I've had to, explain why this area at the front of the house looks so untidy, in the traditional sense at certain times of the year. And I suppose I've been lucky in ways in that meadow is just absolutely alive with bees. It's alive with birds, particularly bullfinches, have come in for the first time. And, as a family, we like looking out and seeing those. But if we didn't have them, I think I'd get it hard to sell this as, a worthwhile step because, as I say, in the traditional sense, it looks untidy for a lot of the year. But when it's bringing in these pollinators, these butterflies, these moths in the nighttime, the birds that are hanging off the knapweed eating the seed heads for months and months on end, that's when you start to see that it isn't just something that you look at for 2 months. It's an overall thing. So yeah, I've rambled on a little bit. I hope I haven't gone too far off the point. If there's anything that I didn't clear up fully for you, Pádraig, just shoot me another message and I'll answer you there. But certainly any of the bulbs that you mentioned, in terms of adding color to that space, that 50 by 20 space that is predominantly still grass, definitely all those bulbs you mentioned, muscaris, camassias particularly, will be really beneficial because they're tall, they're going to stand up and they're striking. They have a striking flower on them and they will look really well. So all of those, then add in some higher, likes of a few trees into it that look good, that'll have a little bit of longevity. They're going to look good for a long period of time. And yeah, hopefully that gives you, I suppose, adds another dimension of color to that. And then it's easier to, I suppose, sell the story, and maybe it won't look as messy when you get this color through it. So as I said, I hope that answers the question. Lots of interesting episodes coming up. The Christmas Gifts for Gardeners one is coming up. Should be out on the 20th of November, I think. Looking forward to that one. Still to be recorded, but definitely looking forward to it. It's going to be interesting too. I always like that episode. It's always good fun to see different people's lists. So still looking for a male listener to come on. So if any of you guys are out there and you want to come on that episode, shoot me a message, and it'll be recorded over the next week or 10 days at the latest. So hopefully somebody wants to come on. We'll definitely get a male and a female listener anyway, for sure. So looking forward to that one. But that's been this week's episode, answering Pádraig's question on wildflower meadows. Hope it answers the question, Pádraig. Glad you're enjoying the podcast, and thank you very much for that message. That's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.